The indoctrination continues. It's the factory of school and the factory of work saying, fit in all the way. Do exactly what you're told and you'll get a prize. On the other hand, there's this false narrative of authenticity, of social media, of being the next Kardashian, of somehow being this authentic voice that everyone wants to listen to, being an influencer. And that's like winning the lottery. That doesn't happen either. Life on this planet 500 years ago is different than now. The fear we evolved into from generations doesn't know any of that. It simply knows how to trigger fight or flight. It knows how to make us feel like the world is about to end. And it kept us alive in the old days, but now it's a trap.
Seth Godin is a visionary entrepreneur, best-selling author, and world-renowned marketing guru. Known for his groundbreaking approach, Seth has inspired millions to not only think differently, but act boldly through his blog and his books like The Dip, Lynchpin, Tribes, and now This is Strategy. He's built and sold 2 successful businesses and authored 21 bestsellers in 39 languages. How does somebody know, like, okay, this is the time just to grind and keep going versus I actually really need to pivot here? What's the difference?
Is that being the best at what you do in the world in which you live is enormously valuable. How do you become the best one? You don't quit when everyone else does. So that leads to the next question, which is, how do we know when to quit? And my answer is...
The Icons is a show where we learn life lessons from those who achieved iconic success. And today, I'm so excited to be having this conversation with somebody I've been learning from for over 2 decades, Seth Godin. Welcome to the Icons by Motiversity.
Well, thank you for having me. 39 languages, but I only wrote them in 1 language. I had help on the other 38.
Fair enough. I mean, speaking of remarkable, you touch on this idea of being remarkable or being unique in a way that is specific to you. And I think that everyone is drawn to that in a certain way. How do we become remarkable?
We begin by understanding what remarkable means. It doesn't mean standing out. It doesn't mean having a gimmick. It doesn't mean being the only one in the world. It means worth making a remark about. If somebody else talks about you in a positive way, you are, by definition, remarkable. Why would they do that? They're only going to do it because it's good for them. People don't talk about you because they're rooting for you. They talk about you because they're rooting for themselves. So what it means to be remarkable is to be of service, to bring enough empathy to the table, to not fit in, to not buy the indoctrination, but to stand out on behalf of the people you're trying to make a difference for.
And how did you start to uncover this idea or this kind of philosophy? Was there an episode early on or something that happened early on?
Well, in my book, Purple Cow, I wrote about my late friend, Lionel Poulin. Lionel had died in a tragic helicopter crash, and I wanted to dedicate a book to him. I didn't have a book. I had been out of the publishing world for a little while. So I wrote a book inspired by what I learned from him. Now, we can say a lot of things about Paris, France, but we can agree they have a lot of bakeries. They have more bakeries selling bread than just about anywhere in the world. So why is there a line out the door, still to this day, when his daughter runs it at the Poulin Bakery? It's not because he has a gimmick. It's because the bread he makes and the way he makes it is worth flying across the world to get. It's worth bringing to your friend's house. It's worth talking about because it gives you status. It gives you connection. He didn't do that by copying what other people do. He did that by determining what would be worth making.
You've got this way of seeing the same thing we're all seeing, but from a slightly different angle. And all of a sudden we're like, oh, I now see it the way Seth sees it. It's amazing. What do you feel like the world needs to see slightly differently right now?
You know, there are 2 things going on, particularly for young people. One is the indoctrination. The indoctrination continues. It's the factory of school and the factory of work saying, fit in all the way. Do exactly what you're told and you'll get a prize. And we're discovering that indoctrination with the issues of caste and injustice that come with it doesn't really work for a lot of people. On the other hand, there's this false narrative of authenticity, of social media, of being the next Kardashian, of somehow being this authentic voice that everyone wants to listen to, being an influencer. And that's like winning the lottery. That doesn't happen either. So those are the 2 poles. And what we have to do instead is dig in and figure out where the system is. Why are we being indoctrinated? Where are the opportunities to contribute in a way where we can point to and say, I helped grow that. That big problems demand small changes. Small changes over time that add up to making a big difference.
You touch on this experience that a lot of people are going through, and we work with a lot of youth. A lot of youth watch our channels, and you can feel their fears, you can feel their hopes, you can feel all sorts of things. But you talk about fear in a really interesting way. You talk about it as kind of an indication that you're onto something meaningful. How have you managed fear, or how could those who are listening understand fear differently?
Life on this planet 500 years ago is different than now. Many people, billions of us, have a roof over our head. We know where dinner is coming from. But fear, the fear we evolved into from generations, doesn't know any of that. It simply knows how to trigger fight or flight. It knows how to make us feel like the world is about to end. And it kept us alive in the old days. But now it's a trap. So writer's block. Writer's block doesn't exist. It was recently invented. It's a myth. There's no such thing as writer's block. But people say they can't write. They're afraid. Well, my friend Steve Pressfield calls that resistance. And resistance is that feeling we get when we're about to do something important. And our option is the same way a marathon runner views getting tired as a symptom they're doing a good job. Being afraid is a symptom that you might be about to do something that involves responsibility and making an impact. And I look for that feeling. If I don't feel it, I'm not trying hard enough.
So it's so interesting that fear, I think a lot of us would try to get to a place where we learn to live with fear, but you almost learn to look for fear. That's kind of a really interesting, almost signal to know I am doing something important. I am feeling a certain way, but that doesn't mean run. That can mean something totally different. And I think it's pretty clear to a lot of people we live in a world right now that's so full of fear, and hopefully that can switch or change. But in this time, you've decided to write a book on strategy. Why strategy?
I think the big challenge we have is people don't even know what strategy is. We don't talk about strategy. We think it has to do with planning. Plans are about you exercising your agency and authority. We make a plan and then we work to make it true. Strategy isn't that. Strategy acknowledges that there are other people, that there are other systems, that what we're thinking of doing might not work. And it's hard to talk about that, to say, I'm going to go build these assets and go on this project, and it might not work, but this is my strategy. So instead, we default to following the crowd, whatever the crowd is doing. So saying, I'm going to go on TikTok and get 50 million followers and then make a lot of money, that's like saying, I'm going to go buy a lottery ticket. And people know that the lottery isn't a strategy. Strategy is a philosophy of becoming. It is a reasonable and rational plan of how we are going to engage with other people's plans so that we can all get to where we want to go.
You wrote this line that the future is like an unvisited city, but we can see it from a distance. And I felt like just reading that sentence helped me make sense of so many conversations that happen in a strategic way where you've got some ideas, you've got vantage, you've got all sorts of plans, but so does everyone else that's living in this city. How did you come up with that, or what does that mean to you?
Well, I'm not exactly sure where my ideas come from. I think they come from where everybody else's ideas come from. The difference is I write them down. What we do when we seek to be creative, to have an idea, is we make an assertion and then we tell a story about it. I look for things that don't make sense. And then I try to understand why they could be, because the world should make sense if you understand what underlies it. So the opportunity that someone has as they're coming up in the world is to say, not, that's working, I'm going to go do it, but to say, why is that working? What are the underpinnings that led to a line being out front of that place and not this place? Why is that a well-paid job and not this? Why am I more likely to come out ahead if I do that instead of this? If you can understand the mechanics of it, the dynamics, then when the world changes, and it always does, you won't be stuck.
So if somebody picks up this as strategy, what do you hope is their big takeaway?
Well, the biggest thing I'm asking people to do is to find someone else and talk about it. Don't hide your strategy. Strategies are different than tactics. Tactics, they can be a surprise. They can be an advantage if they're a secret. Strategies, we know what Nike's strategy is. We know Netflix's strategy. We know Starbucks' strategy. It's not a secret, right? And can you tell me what yours is? At this famous college that you're going to almost go bankrupt to go to, why did you choose to do that instead of going to the state school with a full scholarship? If you can't tell me why, you have no business spending $250,000 to go make that mistake.
It's fascinating how it almost can start with questions, can't it? Just these really does in lots of ways. And one of the questions I find personally kind of front and center with this is the question of how do I know when to keep going versus when to pivot, when to change course? And really, it's almost fundamental to leadership and strategy. And you touch on this a little bit in the dip.
Right.
How does somebody know, like, okay, this is the time just to grind and keep going versus I actually really need to pivot here? What's the difference?
So the shortest book I've ever published is called The Dip. And it was the first book about quitting, which is amazing because we all quit, right? Unless you're wearing a tutu to work, you quit ballet at some point. And what I argue in the book, first of all, is that being the best at what you do in the world in which you live is enormously valuable. That if you're going to go buy a bagel or call a locksmith or anything in between, who are you going to call? You're going to call the best one. Being third is worth very little. How do you become the best one? You don't quit when everyone else does. That at the gym, lots of people are there in January and February. They signed up at the beginning of the year. But the ones who are still there in March are more fit because they didn't quit. So that leads to the next question, which is, how do we know when to quit? Because we shouldn't do things that aren't working forever. And my answer is, first, has anyone else ever made it through this dip? Has anyone else made it through the darkness and gotten out to the other side? So organic chemistry is a bear. No one likes organic chemistry. You have to get through it to get into medical school. It's a dip. They built it, not because you need organic chemistry to be a doctor, but because they need a lot of people to drop out. So if you know that, when it gets hard, you can say, good news, this is hard. Now I know why it's here. If I can just make it through this on the other side, things will be better. Okay, that's different than saying, I'm going to be the first person who becomes a billionaire making YouTube videos, right? It looks like, Mr. Beast has finally figured out how to get almost there, but 1 out of 500,000 are bad odds. So if that's not a path, that doesn't mean you shouldn't try, but it means you should go in with your eyes open saying, there's a big chunk of lottery ticket here, that this isn't a well-worn path where I get through a dip and then I'm going to be fine. This is a really difficult path that's probably not going to get me to where I want to go.
I heard Bill Gates touch on this once. There's that idea of the 10,000 hours, right?
Mm-hmm.
And he was saying, well, really behind 10,000 hours is two things. A, the decision to not quit, but B, these signals from the other side that's saying, keep going. Like, you've got something here. And so it was kind of an interesting conversation between this internal drive, but also these external validators that are saying, maybe try it this way, or maybe, this is the way to do it versus that. How much of it is just an internal grit your teeth versus you actually are looking for people to say like, well, I'll buy that from you, or actually you are really good at that, but maybe not as good at this?
Well, one of the things we're looking for when we help other people or when we're on our own journey is scaffolding. Scaffolding are the steps that help us get up another level. So that's what a great teacher does. That all learning is self-learning. But when you hit a wall, having someone next to you who can say, let's go around this way, gets you up to the next one and the next one. So in many communities, there isn't scaffolding to find yourself at a well-known school or to find yourself doing computer programming because you're not getting a leg up as you go. So surrounding ourselves with people who can give us scaffolding is critical. But back to Bill's point, the thing that's confusing about the 10,000 hours is this. there's a survivor bias in it, in that the people who are good not only put in 10,000 hours, they didn't quit. The people who put in 4,000 hours and quit aren't in the set that we're examining anymore. So one of the things that the 10,000 hour rule measures is simply, did you not quit? And one of the reasons to quit is you're not good at it. One of the reasons to quit is you don't get any joy in it. One of the reasons to quit is there is no scaffolding and you get frustrated. So part of what we're looking for on our journey is to say, are there enough lights on this road that when I hit the dip, I'm going to be less tempted to quit? So, I came up in the book packaging business. I did hundreds of books. And the beauty of it is authors don't compete with each other. That authors don't mind that their books are next to each other in the bookstore. In fact, they don't sell at the drugstore. They sell next to other books. So there was always an author who I could lean on to learn the next thing. There are other industries where that's just not the case. Those industries are lonelier and more difficult to work your way up because there isn't scaffolding for you.
That's a fascinating concept. So how did you discover what you were willing to push through, what you didn't want to quit at? How did you know you wanted to be what you do now?
Okay, well, I think it's more interesting to celebrate the things I decided to quit at.
Oh, interesting.
Because I don't view it as a failure. I view it as a key asset of my career. So one of my first jobs was working in the back room of a factory in St. Louis, moving an IBM 360 mainframe from one platform to another. And my eyes were bleeding. I mean, this was detail-oriented, boring work where the only highlight was lunch. And if you ate a lot of lunch, then you were sleepy. I mean, there was nothing about this that I said, this is my life, even though I was okay at it and I was getting decent scaffolding. So I quit doing it because I said, every day I am doing this, I am not doing that. There have been many projects where I invented something where I was wrong or I was right. Like I was one of the first people to make DVDs. Instead of data on books, it would be on a DVD. I did one with Fisher Price, etc. And once it became clear to me that the internet was going to make DVDs obsolete, even though the DVD thing was sort of working, and I had worked very hard to get that far, I shut the door immediately with no regrets. Because I said, every day I'm maintaining the DVD thing, I am not doing the internet thing. And a brief aside about DVDs, people remember the red envelopes from Netflix. Netflix made 100% of their profit renting DVDs by mail. And Ted and Reed, the people who ran Netflix, decided to bet on streaming, even though they made 0% of their money from streaming. So as they were putting together the plans and building that whole thing out, they intentionally did not invite anyone from the DVD leadership team to any of the meetings. They weren't allowed to come because they knew if they came, they would water down everything. There would be an argument for a blended approach. Everything would be a little softer. And instead, they're like, this boat, we're going to burn that boat. Not today, but as soon as we can. And you can't come to the meetings. That is when it became Netflix.
Wow. How did you know that DVDs weren't the future?
So what we're looking for with systems, which I write a lot about in the book. Systems, what's the most famous system? It's the solar system. Everyone knows what the solar system is. There's a little controversy about Pluto, but in general, we know what the solar system is. What holds it together? The Earth doesn't rotate the sun because it has a crush on the sun. It does it because of gravity. And gravity's invisible. But it's true, there's gravity. We're looking for gravity. We're looking for what are the invisible forces that cause people in a system to make decisions they don't even know they're making. And with the DVD thing, it started because the book publishers were freaking out that books were going to be replaced by something. So they all started DVD divisions. So I could get meetings at those places because I had enough trust to do that. And some of them had money to spend. But as soon as the world started to shift, the gravitational forces started to shift. And I could see the focus begin to shift. And if I wanted to talk to someone who wanted to do something new, they weren't going to be interested in DVDs. They were going to be interested in this new thing, this internet thing. And when we add Moore's law to it, and the network effect, and the fact that things that connect tend to get bigger, DVDs don't connect. The internet has 2 words in it, and both of them mean connect. I was like, sign me up for that.
No way. We're looking for gravity. That's awesome. And you touched on trust, which is core to what you think about, teach on. And in Tribes, you talked about trust, you talked about community, you talked about leadership. And a lot of people nowadays, I think, maybe get this, they think about it differently. They think about it through a platform or through growth on social media, or they think it through TikTok. What does building a tribe mean to you? How do people do it?
So the idea of a tribe goes back thousands of years before colonialism. And it's not about a particular group of people. It's about the concept of a village, a cadre, a cohort. Human beings are wired to have that. And you're not going to have a tribe. But you might find a tribe that needs you. There might be an existing tribe that is looking for a leader or a souvenir or a narrative or a culture. So don't demand people follow you. Find people who are looking to be connected and offer that to them. So Patagonia did not invent dirtbag mountain climbers. They just showed up to offer them the uniform that they were looking for. So you're not in the Patagonia tribe. It's different, right? You're just showing up where you are needed.
I mean, it's this idea of service or generosity. You speak about these concepts as being so core. I mean, behind all your work is this marketing brain that's just been able to figure things out before others have. And a big message is generosity or service. Why do those two things go hand in hand? Why does marketing, this thing where it feels like I'm trying to sell you, why do you see that related to service?
Generous doesn't mean free. A heart surgeon who sees something when she's got you cut open that frightens her, but who leans into it and saves your life, has done a generous thing, as opposed to the one who finds deniability and says, sorry, we lost him. And when you get the bill, you don't mind because a generous act occurred. Generosity is simply practical empathy. I don't know what you know, I don't see what you see, and that's okay. If I can go to where you are and offer you what you need or want, you will happily pay me. And in fact, you would be upset if I hadn't offered you a chance to pay me to solve your problem. So the other kind of marketing of hustle and hassle and lying and shortcuts, that works for a little tiny while, and then it doesn't. This method is generative. This method doesn't have to be concealed. You can show people what you know, and without manipulating them, make a change happen.
You know, I mentioned it in the intro that I've been reading your work for 20 years, and your work just happens to be in the space that's moving the fastest in the last 20 years, which is pretty fascinating to think that this area that's evolving at the breakneck speed that it is typically brings with it these waves that maybe you can ride for a little while, but you can't ride. But you've been doing it for decades. What do you think is behind that longevity for you? Again, can others figure it out for themselves? I mean, lasting is a tricky thing nowadays.
I would say the following. All the things I say no to matter way more than the things I say yes to. So I got lucky on the day I was born. I got lucky on the day that I showed up at college and took computer science. I got lucky 40 times. And one of the times I got lucky, I wrote a book called Permission Marketing. I invented email marketing. And the offers that came in were write the sequel, the Permission Marketing Handbook, and start an email marketing company like MailChimp. So if I had started MailChimp, I would have made a lot more money, but I would have invented nothing new for all those years. And if I'd written the sequel and then a handbook and then another sequel and started a consulting firm, that's all I would have done. So I walked away from likely success because I prefer to explore. And what we're not keeping track of here is how many times I've been wrong or failed. I've written 9,000 blog posts, but half of them were below average. We just don't remember those, right? And so I'm not saying everyone should go on this journey, but it wasn't a journey that was me seeing the future really clearly and bringing skill. It was me seeing systems and deciding never to make bets that were so big that if I was wrong, I was out of the game. Instead, view the projects like art projects. And if a piece of art doesn't work, that's okay. We'll go on to the next one.
One of the things that's really fascinating about this show, and it's kind of come out of nowhere, we're the largest motivational media network on YouTube. And so most of the people that watch us are 20-year-olds. This show, most of the people that tune in are 60, 70, or 80. The demographic is really different. And I think it's just a result of the conversations we've had. But one of the things that's coming up from that group, and I just love reading their comments, is around hopes that people still have, regardless of their age, but also this question of, is it too late? Is it ever too late? Like, what would you offer to somebody who's kind of, in a different chapter of their life now and asking that question themselves?
I was in an assisted living place last week, and one person who was, I think 100, turned to someone she didn't know who was 80 and offered her a smile. No compensation. Did that make a difference? I hope we can agree it did. The opportunity here is to seek the smallest viable audience, not the biggest possible one. So all these books that have sold all these copies, not one of them has reached more than 1% of the US population. So to a rounding error, my market share is 0. And that's fine with me. It's not for the people it's not for, right? It's for the people who are seeking it. So if you're in a stage, I don't care if you're 20 or 80, are there 5 people who would miss you if you were gone? Is there something brave and generous that you can do that transforms a small group of people? And, if you go to a woodworking video, it's only seen by 100 people on YouTube, but it transforms the way they do their craft, then they're glad you made it. The mistake, the trap, is we fell in love with Ed Sullivan and MASH and network TV. And now, if I can't be a Kardashian, I don't want anything. And the hustle you have to do to get to that scale is absurd. Don't do that. The real win is to be able to say 2 things when we launch a project. 1, this might not work. And 2, it might not be for you. And if you can't say those 2 things, very hard to do your work.
And how about a question for the 20-year-olds? What would you offer yourself if you were 20 nowadays? Or what would you offer a 20-year-old who's looking at this world saying, what do I do?
Time horizons are difficult. And my generation and the one before really screwed up the planet that we're handing you. So it's easy to say, 10 years from now, there's going to be 15 million climate migrants. Why should I even try? But the year I was born, the Berlin blockade had just ended. The Cuban Missile Crisis was a year away. And the world was less than 10 minutes from nuclear annihilation. I'm glad people tried. And so you can make a living and you can make a difference. But you can't do those 2 things and also fit in all the way and buy the indoctrination. You can't do those things and also get what you seek in 24 hours. So when someone offers you a short-term shortcut, decline. And when something feels like you need to conceal it because it doesn't feel right to you, decline. That what we have, if you're 20, you got another 90 years on this planet. What seeds will you plant in the soil that can nurture them so that there'll be a tree for you to sit under 10 years from now? Not in 10 minutes, but over time. And the decisions that I made when I was 20, 2/3 of them didn't work out. But the ones that did work out involved planting a seed like that, like choosing to study, not to get an A, because I got as few A's as I could in college, but to take as many courses as I could on the widest variety of things I could, because I knew there was no chance I was going to do for a living what I thought I was going to do for a living when I was 20.
Seth, what's the lesson that took you the longest to learn?
There are lessons I haven't learned yet. So they add up to more than 60 years worth. My friend Ben Zander and his former wife Roz have one, which is don't take yourself so damn seriously, which I like. And the one of humility, not the false humility of denying the things that are true, but the humility that comes with empathy, to realize I can't read your mind and that everything you believe is true. And I can't deny that you believe that. So I need to have the humility to show up acknowledging that you believe it so that I can create the conditions for you to change your mind, because I can't change your mind for you.
Boy, the world needs to hear that right now, doesn't it? Me included. Do you feel like you've fallen victim to the take yourself too seriously? I feel like one of the things that stands out to me about you is that you've had this outward expression of not taking yourself that seriously.
So it used to be when I talked to people about Amazon reviews, I was talking to a very small group of people, authors like me. But now, anybody who's on any form of social media is getting this thing called feedback. And what I discovered about 12 years ago is that I would read a 1-star review on Amazon and it would ruin my day. And I'd want to write back to this person, but they're anonymous. All a 1-star review says is, this book wasn't for me. Because if anyone gave you a 5-star review, it's known that the book worked for someone. So I stopped reading all the reviews, not just the 1-star ones, but the 5-star ones. I realized no author had ever said, oh, I'm a much better writer now. I read all my bad reviews. I want to hear from people I respect. I want to hear from people who are professionals. But I don't need to hear that it's not in Italian and you only speak Italian. I learned nothing from this. Well, if you're on social media and you are listening to the crowd, it's either going to make you feel bad or it's not. If it makes you feel bad, it's because you're taking yourself seriously. If it doesn't make you feel bad, you're building too thick a skin, and that's not going to help either. So the way that I think about this is I take the work very seriously, but I'm working hard to not take any given individual's response to the work too seriously, because all that means is they didn't get the joke.
What do you hope your legacy is?
This has been such an extraordinary run. I would say that I would like to be judged by what the people I taught other people.
21 bestsellers. I mean, it's amazing just to say it. What's next?
Hey, that's not fair. Today's pub day. I got at least 6 months before you get to ask me that question.
Sounds great. Seth, this has been an absolute honor. Thank you very much.
Thank you. What a treat.
Likewise. Thank you.